Hello and welcome to Dale Schafer Law Chats, a candid conversation with industry professionals on complex legal and business issues in the cannabis industry. I am Heather Schafer, legal assistant with the law offices of Dale Schafer and CEO of Agora Business Services. And you all know attorney Dale Schafer, two-decade California cannabis attorney with a current focus on the cannabis business law. Today we are chatting with Robert Finkle, and he's an attorney in the cannabis industry. Robert, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I don't quite have the extensive sort of history that Mr. Schafer does, but I've got a little bit of one. I've been an attorney for about 10 years. The last 5 years have been exclusively for cannabis business issues, so probably much like Dale there. I've always had some cannabis clients going back to the old medical framework and the collective cooperative framework. But really about 5 years ago is when it picked up and I started focusing on cannabis business issues. And cannabis business issues is really a grouping of different types of practices. And a lot of attorneys will bring their prior experience and then have to add in some new stuff. So for instance, I cut my teeth as a litigator. And I still do litigation. I do cannabis business litigation. But we all had to take a hard look at regulatory compliance and figure out how that was going to work. So I've done a lot of work there. Because of my history over the past few years in the ever-changing cannabis market, I've endeavored to learn quite a bit about corporate law and transactions. And so I do a lot of work there too, especially startup side. When it gets to M&A, that's where it tends to get a little bit beyond me. But I'm a lifelong cannabis user. I was a high school dropout before I ever used cannabis, and now I am an attorney. So I'm a firm believer that it is a plant that can help people. So I've got some history there. But yeah, anyway, I think that's about it for my background.
Well, let me just pipe in quick, Bob, that we're both attorneys and we have clients, and when we have clients, we have a relationship, and what we talk about is attorney-client privileged, and we're giving advice. You and I are talking today informally. Even though we have clients, we're not intending to give anybody legal advice or thinking they have an attorney-client relationship with us. So the standard disclaimers that, don't swallow all the stuff that you're told and think it applies to you, because there's a lot of nuances in this. So from that starting point, I'll jump in here, because what intrigued me about you when we first talked was that you'd been through the insurance defense side of this, of the legal world, if you will. You'd been introduced to that. You'd seen how litigation plays into insurance, because you don't have it, basically, you're done. So from that standpoint, you and I have chatted multiple times about the overlay in business of being insured and assigning risk through contracts and things like that are sort of the cornerstone of most businesses. And the cannabis industry has been, sort of weak on that, if you will, and we're waiting for court decisions to help clarify some things for us. But I wanted to start talking about the insurance mess. Now, I have some clients, and one of them in Oakland, notably, that got robbed. It was not, looting. It was 50 cars showed up. When they all got there, they came in with instruments, broke in, stole everything they could, and left. The cops showed up, looked, and they were outnumbered, and there was demonstrations that went away. So within that context, what have you seen happen over the last couple of weeks that we've been dealing with these just robberies?
Yeah, so I had several clients as well that that were burglarized with criminals that were taking advantage of legitimate protests that I think we all understand need to happen in this country. And it's a sad state of affairs, because you have these protests, this Black Lives Matter, very, very important purpose. And it's interesting because the drug war, the war on drugs, actually ties into that very closely. And so by virtue of the protests, there were actual criminals that were able to take advantage and cause harm both to the movement, because the movement itself didn't need violence or criminal activity. It hurts the message. And also because it's actually hurting some of the folks that have been impacted by inequality. And in fact, one of the folks that I had heard about was in Oakland was an equity candidate. So it's a person who's actually trying to endeavor to correct the war on drugs and racial disparity. And there he is, he gets robbed out of it. So it's been pretty bad. I've heard of at least 50 retailers, if not more, were robbed. I've heard that police response times range from half an hour to 5 or 6 hours. So people weren't getting the support they needed from law enforcement, which is another ironic fact out of this mess and how it all ties together. My understanding is that there were times during these robberies that folks would come back 2 and 3 times once they found something they couldn't lift by themselves. They brought back a crew. And to tie that back into what you were getting at earlier, Dale, is that, a lot of these cannabis businesses aren't insured, and some that are underinsured, and even ones that are properly insured are going to face a hard road ahead in getting insurance companies to pay out on these claims, because they're going to try their best to couch this whole thing in social unrest and riot exclusions, when, like you said, it's patently obvious that these were burglaries and organized crime. And so it might not have been the equity candidate, but somebody else who was on a call that I was on when I learned about that candidate getting robbed, maybe another store owner said, yes, so we made our claim. We already got our letter back from the insurance company saying that this was looting and rioting and not burglaries. And so your claim's denied. And unfortunately, I didn't have a voice in that call. I wanted to reach out immediately and tell that person that that's their first line of defense. And so you need to take that to an attorney who understands how to leverage the insurance company, understands the law behind bad faith insurance, and get yourself some coverage.
Well, I can recall before any of this happened, there were insurance companies just refusing to even take down your information and investigate a claim or a notice of a claim.
I hadn't heard that so much. I've just heard maybe by virtue of making an outright denial is what you're saying. They didn't investigate it. And that ties back into the insurance company's obligations to investigate a loss before they make a decision. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head there.
Well, and the Department of Insurance put out a pretty straightforward, memo that the insurance code requires that you do certain things in a good faith investigation of a claim and pay what's owed, and not make people go sue you to get what they're owed. That's a basis of a bad faith claim. And I have been on both sides of a bad faith claim. I work for a firm that had a plaintiff's department that went after some insurance companies. We represented a lot of insurance companies, so we knew the nuances involved, and sued them, got a $5 million judgment because it was a first party claim. The guy was black, and there's a lot of things were bad optics about it. On the other side, I formed a partnership, and a file came with my partner where the previous firm had made a coverage decision, a coverage opinion, okay, and they denied a claim. So it landed in my lap. My partner didn't know anything what she was doing, so I went investigating. It just got worse, and they sued for bad faith. I ended up being a witness, and I had to go investigate with a gun because these people were so crazy. But it didn't matter. There was a $7 million judgment on that. And so there are sides of this that I think the laws exist for a reason, because people have suffered when they have a contract says you're going to pay X amount in these conditions. And one of my concerns in this industry is if we have a Schedule I drug, we don't really have a multitude of admitted in-state carriers that that monetize their presence here so that you can be assured you get some money. And my concern of the Schedule I drug is if you compare the declarations, exclusions parts of these contracts, they find loopholes. Insurance lives by taking your premiums. They don't live by paying out their what they owe. So I know you told me you'd had some experience with the law firm in LA who seems to be handling this. Tell us about that.
Well, I wanted to go back just a little bit. So my experience, I did do insurance defense, and I also, spent a lot more time as a plaintiff's lawyer than a defense lawyer, where insurance issues come up because you want the defendant to have insurance. But then I've also prosecuted first-person bad faith claims, and that's kind of what you're referring to. But just to rewind in terms of the insurance company's obligations, A lot of people don't know this, but they actually have a duty and obligation to try their best to find coverage, not deny it out of hand, which is what we were just talking about. But it's interesting. It goes deeper than that. I mean, that's not the only reason that if you get a denial, you need to see an attorney. People need to understand that insurance contracts are very complex documents, and words in those documents sometimes don't have plain meaning. And they're actually construed very strictly against the insurance company who is the preparer of those documents. And so it might be when you read a denial and it says, oh, you are denied on the basis that there is an exclusion for riots or looting, and so you don't have coverage. Somebody who's not sophisticated or doesn't understand the nuance there would say, okay, fine, I got denied. But that's not, I mean, you still need to go see an attorney. Attorneys will do free consultations, especially for something like this. Go see an attorney because they might tell you that the denial was based on language that was misapplied, or you have better language that's applicable. In terms of recovering from insurance companies on cannabis claims, I have been successful. There was a string of robberies last year in Oakland. I think a lot of this stemmed from having the addresses of licensees on the internet, which I'm glad is no longer the case after this last round. But it appeared to be very organized. In the case that I worked on, it was one of many that were burglarized over a month span. The insurance company absolutely came in and tried to say that the security system that they had installed wasn't compliant or didn't meet the standards of the policy, and so we're going to deny your claim. And luckily, this person was already a client of mine, so they just brought it up with me. I'm like, no, let me take a look at it. We took a look at it, and we found that the requirements for motion sensors, that's what it required at the time, weren't possible because they were asking for motion sensors in a grow room, and grow rooms have a lot of ambient movement. And so either the motion sensor will get false positives all the time, or it wouldn't capture it. It just be rendered ineffective because of all the movement in the room. Now technology is advancing, but you can take a look at that and say, look, you can't ask us to do something impossible to get our coverage. That's not how contracts work. And so ultimately, the argument did hold some sway with them, and they paid out. And my client probably recovered 2/3 of what they lost, which because it was an early settlement, and that's sometimes you have to make that decision. And it was for a cannabis crop, so they will pay. And there are decisions, not necessarily decisions inside the insurance context, but there is legislation that was passed several years ago, as well as some decisions between cannabis companies where contracts made in California for California parties that involve cannabis are not just automatically rendered illegal because of their federal status, which is what you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, I know that some of the early discussions I had with distributors and comparing the cannabis policies available, there were some gaps, and most notably goods in transit. Your truck's got a $10 million worth of product. It gets into an accident, and the helicopter shows little beetles running in there and ripping off all your product. They pay for your lost truck, the truck you run into, the people hurt, but your cannabis crop or whatever is, not going to be covered. Are you seeing those gaps being filled in? And if so, are they for full coverage, less than under coverage? What are you seeing?
I wish those gaps were filled in a little bit better from the start. I mean, it's an amalgam of reasons why those gaps aren't covered, right? First of all, you've got new insurance broker professionals in the space that don't necessarily understand everything they need to properly help a business. Even if those folks do, and what I like to see from an insurance broker is a whole myriad of options after a very intense interview about all the things that you do, so that they know where your exposure points are, and they give you a whole menu of insurance. And this is what it's going to cost at the most, and this is what and this is what each different type of insurance costs, and then you can kind of pick. And then you have operators, licensees who are seeking this insurance who, like you said earlier, I mean, they're not used to absorbing these types of costs. There's a lot of costs that come from being part of the regulated market, and so that it's like, well, we don't really need it because we can't afford to have it right now because of all the other costs. And then looking back on hindsight being 2020, boy, it would have really been nice to get that coverage in the first place or fill a gap in coverage. The gap I saw that was particularly egregious was a client of mine was insured with a commercial general liability policy, but it was based on something called claims made, which meant that the claim had to occur within the coverage period for it to be effective. And for commercial general liability, that's a terrible way to go. That type of coverage is for licensed professionals like you and I, Dale, architects, engineers. It's terrible because somebody could get injured at the last quarter of a year in which you have coverage. They don't think they've got any damage. They don't really talk about it. 6 months later, they come back and they say, hey, I've got damage. If you had a commercial general liability with the proper type of coverage,
Occurrence,
right? You'd be covered for that period and you would have had coverage. But you wouldn't have gotten coverage if for the claims made, which just doesn't make any sense in that context. So there's gaps.
Well, and the tail coverage. I mean, when you go from one carrier to another, then you have discussions. Do I think there's anything out there? Well, I don't know. Well, we'll give you some tail. How much is it going to cost so that we will pick up something that was an occurrence before in a claims made policy, and here the claim comes on our risk, and you're going to be priced for that. That's how the world works. Okay, but without that being made available to people, they don't even know that exists. And I have a lease I'm looking at for a client of mine to go into Sacramento and to pick up some space to build distro and delivery. As I'm reading the lease, they're typically pretty favorable for the landlord, and it includes a lot of mandatory coverage in there at policy limits and on occurrence basis, and they got to be added as additional insured. So I've got to have my insurance guy take a look at this and give my client a quote. Okay, what's you're paying this amount per square foot triple net. Now, here's what the insurance is going to be. And are you having, issues like that when somebody tries to get a ground lease and they're wrapped in with taking all the risk and, the landlord gets none?
Well, I think that's pretty typical of commercial leases. I've seen that a lot outside the cannabis space. What I saw really in the cannabis space that changed in leases was that they were charging a whole lot more for the cannabis business on the one hand. And on the other hand, they would usually have provisions that would allow them to get the tenant out if they face some sort of prosecution to put the property at risk. But I am seeing that insurance coverage and requirements in leases, commercial leases, and that underscores the need that as this market moves towards a legitimate, licensed, classic, dealing with the standard business issues that any businesses face, that insurance is a huge consideration there because it comes into play in terms of a lease that you might get. It comes into play in terms of distribution license where there's an insurance requirement. It comes into play with respect to vehicles on the road where there's an insurance requirement. And it would behoove our clients, our folks, and I tell it to everybody, there's a couple of essential people you meet with before you really get cranking if you can. One of those is an insurance broker. Another one, when you think about the crazy tax liabilities. Mm-hmm. And it's just a meeting so you can be apprised, at least know what you're supposed to be doing instead of just, winging it.
One of the downsides of what's happening right now is the loss of dispensaries. I mean, call them retail stores, whatever. And going into licensing, LA had 1,500 just in their city, and we're down to less than 500 that are open now after getting broken into and things like that. So the black market, let's call it that. I mean, it's a pejorative and people don't think it's politically correct, but too bad. The black market is ready, willing, and able to service your customers. So what kind of tension are you seeing with building the industry when the black market keeps getting nitrous oxide in its engine from whatever, the neo-prohibition stance of the government and law enforcement, and then all of a sudden this virus shows up and they killed a black man that just pushes everything over the edge, and it's like we can no longer. I mean, I got a mixed race family. You think we can no longer allow this to happen. So now the black market goes, hey, we're here. I got a bag for you, and our industry just continues to go backwards.
I mean, I think recent events really highlight and underscore and boldface and increase the font size. You just can't overstate the amount of extra work, money, time, effort, all the way around that it takes to run a licensed cannabis business. It's nearly impossible. It's causing businesses to have zero margins or operate in the red, and just try to keep chugging along until things change. And these robberies, I mean, they just, so these are cannabis companies that don't have banking access for the most part, right? Because of COVID, they didn't have access to go pay taxes. The IRS, banks, local agencies, state agencies pushed off meeting with cash payments because of COVID, right? So then they were cash heavy, which, I mean, over and above. And then all their addresses are kind of out there on the internet, so everybody kind of knows where they are. And now they're robbed and they have nothing left, and they've had to go, they've spent millions of dollars going through all the hoops to do this right. They've had tax money robbed, right? Like you're acting as a bank for the government when they won't take that money. And do you think, and where's the government on this? I mean, I haven't heard any announcements from the state that any type of tax relief would be available if tax money was stolen, because it couldn't have gotten put into the state coffers. But yeah, it's like all the cards were already stacked against licensed entities, and now this just blows it wide open. I mean, if we're going to have success here, we've got to have drastic action. We've got to have a government and a police force that treats us as equals, or especially given the amount of money we pay them to operate, they need to think about what other relief can be offered to the licensed industry, whether it's waiving or delaying fees for a couple years, whether it's lowering the standards to operate at this time and increasing the amount of application processability that these agencies have. I mean, I have clients, I don't want to, pick on any agency above any other, but suffice to say, I had 3 clients in one agency take between 9 months and a year to get a license issued. That's just crazy, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't see us successfully moving away from the black market until these very real issues are addressed, especially with these new situations, these new issues that we're all now facing with COVID and the burglaries. So, man.
Well, one of the things that's very clear to me looking at the numbers and being as old as I am, that the war on drugs, when it really went on steroids, they took any animus that may have been existing for people who use drugs and used it to disproportionately go after certain races. I mean, let's just be blunt about it. I was the target of the war on drugs, but I'm an old white dude. So my perspective was a lot different. And now that they have had to look at their,
that's probably what you did. You probably caused a ruckus out there.
Well, have you ever met Molly? Okay. She loved to poke the tiger. So yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly. I did exactly what they charged me with, but going to prison for 5 years was just such a truckload of bullshit that I don't even know. But now we've had to look at who's in jail, and they're turning people loose. Like, you're going to get COVID. No, they shouldn't have been there in the first damn place. So we've had to look at that part of the criminal justice system. And now it is hard to argue with video of what happens. And, when you're a celebrity and they still throw you the ground point guns at you and it's on videotape, come on, dude. In the 1960s, when I was awoke, if you want to call it that, this was a problem then. And now here we are, my children. I mean, you're looking at one of them right there, and you're in the same age range as my kids. It's like, your kids or people that are the next generation will have an opportunity now to go, oh, no, we're not going to do this shit no more. We're going to stand up and make a change. Where that's going, that's my concern, because we haven't changed the mindset of law enforcement, who thinks it's still their job to thump your head if you're using drugs.
Yeah. So, I mean, I said earlier when we started the conversation, I think the war on drugs and BLM movement, I mean, they're inextricably tied together.
Yep.
And I mean, they have very similar things. Maybe they involve slightly different groups of people. Yours truly, right? In terms of people of color, not color, but overall, it was a very racist paradigm and war that was started And it's admittedly, and now you have people we're on Nixon administration admitting this,
Yeah,
whatever. But
Ehrlichman, notably. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of deeper things that I might say about what you were talking about. I would say though, law enforcement needs to stop going after low-hanging fruit. They need to do like if law enforcement spent their time and money, which they have huge budgets, right? Challenging themselves to go after the white collar criminals, the financial criminals who cause hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in damage, and had those folks in jail. um, you might find a better situation. You might find that one, they're more effective. They're actually doing better, good, broad based. You could take all the funding from the war on drugs and just get rid of that. Those people need treatment, right?
Mm.
Start looking at it that way. And I think that you'd probably do a couple things. You probably repair the reputation of law enforcement by having them do this. You'd make them a better force because it takes more sophisticated folks, takes better trained folks. It takes forensics and smart folks to actually figure out how to go after the higher hanging fruit. And so the lower hanging fruit won't have a place there. The folks who go after long hanging fruit, which, I mean, look, there's a wide array of law enforcement people. I know some wonderful people in law enforcement, and there's some terrible people that are in law enforcement. The guy who wants the gun and the badge so he can tell you what to do, that's the last guy you want in there. And that's the guy who's going after law hanging fruit, and that's the guy who's persecuting the war on drugs. He doesn't have a place in law enforcement. He shouldn't have a place in law enforcement. So that's kind of that little thing that's been dawning on my mind recently is I'd like to see them just change who they go after and end the war on drugs for sure. And I think we'd be better off.
Yeah. Well, I've represented, police officers personally. I've worked with their associations and governmental entities had to play 1983, payouts out because they did stupid stuff. And what I found was that they were not recruiting from a group of people who by the numbers are well educated, objective thinkers, and aren't afraid to go out there and thump you if you want to, do something stupid in front of me. I'll take your ass down and shoot you if necessary. And those were who was out there, and fear in that animal. I think that shooting in Atlanta, what that was contempt of cop murder. They had a discussion. The guy smacked him.
It was shocking.
Yeah, well, but I've been there and had those discussions afterwards. The cops circled to protect him, but you smack a cop and something's going to happen. I used to work in an emergency room and they'd come in all beaten up. You ask the cop what happened. Oh, he fell down. Okay, well, code for it. Beat the shit out of him. And that guy in Atlanta smacked him. He said, whatever. He woke up and you ain't going to do it. They knew he wasn't armed with anything going to hurt him. And there was backup. And then after they shot him, they kicked him and stood on him. It's like that was a contempt of cop killing. And we give the cops too many jobs, Bob. They're the default for everything that our society won't address. They're not recruited, trained, resourced, equipped to deal with, mom's pissed at dad because he's out sleeping around and they're fighting and screaming. You don't need somebody to bust the door in with a gun out.
Nor if they're growing a few plants in their backyard, right? I mean,
that one defies logic, Bob. I mean, really. In my case, I got tired of paying $4,000 a pound. So this grows in the backyard. That ain't rocket science. And of course, that's a federal felony. Well, why is that? There was no victim. And when this one still makes me chuckle, when I was arrested and I was put in the front of a beat up old Subaru that had all the equipment inside, but it looked on the outside like it's just, Joe Blow's car. They have a brand new DE agent in the back seat who's asking me questions, and they got to the victim and I started to laugh. Yeah, who is the victim here? And the crusty old fart DE agent turned the radio up real loud and said, "It's the government." Yeah. You and the horse that brought you in on it. There's no victims here.
The victim,
yeah. Where are they?
So that's the thing. It's interesting. I'm sad that they use the words completely defund when the conversation started, because I don't think it really carries the meaning of the message. And I think we're talking about the meaning of the message, and that is that law enforcement's doing the wrong job in the wrong way against the wrong people, and so we need to focus on having them do the right job against the right people the right way. And I think that, you know, we might be onto something here. It might be that the war on drugs, it made it so easy to become part of law enforcement and do whatever that job was supposed to be, right? And it turned into a series of agencies and you know, law enforcement groups that are just, that was what they focused on, low hanging fruit, super easy. And then with that, you get cops that are not the people that you want for law enforcement. You get people that want the gun and the badge and the power.
Well, and one of the things that I dealt with when I was working on the law enforcement side is you know, pitches motions. You had to go in and fight to find out, is this a bad cop or not? And the cops circled their wagons rather than admitting, yeah, you're a shitty cop, you should be off of here. And having those kind of standards that they would stand behind. I didn't find that. Now, arguably 30 years ago, so I'm not saying everything applies today, but some habits just are hard to break unless somebody goes in and, you know, crashes the glass window and says, we're done.
I mean,
I think we're at that moment.
Could you say that as much as the war on drugs created cartels and illegal gangs, it also created police gangs?
Oh,
what if we could say that?
Well, and we've allowed them, look at the court decisions that allowed exigent circumstances to violate the Fourth Amendment. I mean, and they still have no-knock warrants. And how do you justify, you know, kicking in somebody's door? You're going to charge your boyfriend for shooting back at you and go, oh, we're yelling police. The answer is the hell you were. The assumption now is you don't do that. You kick the door and you blast that poor woman. Now, when we got raided, Bob, and it still haunts me, is down in the valley, in Stockton, I think they rolled into the wrong house for, you know, a drug warrant. And they had a little, you know, kid there. He happened to be Mexican. And the officer had a shotgun pointed at him. It went off, blew a hole through his chest. They're in the wrong house. Okay. My kids were, you know, honestly scared shitless. Okay. And when they showed up and pointed guns, my God, you know, my son still has PTSD. It scared the crap out of him.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, I mean, why are we fearing our law enforcement? Why aren't we happy to see them? But no, we seem not to be. But yeah, I mean, that to me is just such a bigger topic and goes on for days. I mean, I think that in terms of our cannabis clients, I think that this is a much smaller topic. And I think it's a little bit easier, which is if you're going to show up in 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 3 minutes when a Wells Fargo's robbed, you better show up in the same amount of time when a cannabis retailer is robbed, because they basically got the same amount of assets.
Well, but have you heard the term of a soft crime? Because inside law enforcement, you know, I've done some negotiating with prosecutors on, you know, soft crimes, even help get a soft homicide dismissed because, you know, it was a soft homicide. You said, you know, theoretically, you know, brother-in-law rapes daughter, you know, dad goes out and puts a bolt in his head, sticks him in a vat of acetic acid, and you found a piece of his ass. It was the real facts. And they couldn't identify who the guy was from the piece of his ass, but, you know, we knew. And I had my former security guy put together a security plan for a place in Modesto, if I remember, it's Modesto, and a gang from Oakland rolled in and ripped it off. And the cops said, yeah, we'll send somebody out to take a report. And they were like really pissed. But when I talked to the security guy, I said, I recommended a bunch of things they do. They don't want to spend the money. And the cops are like, you know, this is a soft crime. I'll take a report. You should be insured and have a.
What would you define a soft crime as?
Between who the police consider to be criminals, and they still look at us as quasi criminals.
So if you have two criminals, and one criminal is in the process of murdering another, and that the first criminal calls for help from law enforcement, and they know that the first one also has, you know, criminal background or is engaged in criminal activity, they're going to treat that as a lower priority because let the criminals, you know, hash it out amongst themselves, kind of thing. And we're still criminals, despite how many millions of tax dollars we've paid for that 40% of which is earmarked for law enforcement.
Yeah.
Oh boy,
well,
that's rough.
But see, that's part of the window. It's like taking a look at the United States military budget. When you take a look at budgets in cities and counties and you go, we're paying 25 to 50% of our dollars to law enforcement, and this is how safe we are. And, you know, you start wondering, why is this? Why are we afraid of them? There's too damn many laws. They're enforced in ways that benefit the people who want to go to court and testify or run their numbers up, rather than really looking for people that we should be afraid of.
Right.
So, and that was one of the things that really struck me when I was sent to prison. Too many people there because we're just mad at them, or the cops are mad at them, whatever. You're not
Right.
doing what you tell. You're still slamming heroin, whatever. We're mad at you. You're going to spend time in prison. And the people we should be afraid of, that's where we should target our money. I don't care whether they're going to kill somebody who's a serial killer or not. We shouldn't allow that to happen. We should be afraid of that. And that's not what we're
Yeah.
seeing in policing.
I guess I wonder, I mean, if all that money was actually for the war on drugs was actually used for the purposes that you were just stating, how much more successful that they would be. I mean, it seems to me that there's just such an incredible amount of tools out there at their disposal that they could really do some good work in the world and be everybody's friend at the end of the day. Are they going to be the friends of the uber rich when they get busted for committing frauds and financial crimes? No. But you know what? That's not the common people. That's not the people that need that protection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, this is discussion we can have for
Sure.
hours. Now, one of the other problems I'm still seeing is that payment for product is just not a smooth thing. What kind of problems are you seeing with your clients about putting product through the supply chain and getting money going back and being satisfied that the deal is being fulfilled?
Well, it runs a gambit. It's very varied. I think that you'll find quite a few people, quite a few transactions. It's kind of the old school black marketeers running the shop, and they might say, you know what, you pissed me off. I'm not going to pay you, and so money doesn't get paid. And I think folks should be aware that when you're talking about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, even as much as $100,000, yes, that's a lot of money. And so the way to handle that is to protect it up front with writings and with reasonable exchanges. Like, okay, you're going to give me the goods, I'm going to give you the money, then we're done, right? As much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Or find ways to get secured into an asset so that if you do get ripped off, you can kind of come back after it. But you've got to be smart because, again, 40, 50, 60, $100,000, a lot for an individual business, but you burn through that immediately if you have to go to court to try to get that back,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you don't have the paperwork, the type of contract that you needed in the first place. So I would urge people to think very long and hard about turning over product or cash to folks. I have heard the industry's kind of rife with that, and you don't get your money back, you don't know you get your goods. I would caution them to, whenever anybody tries to speed the deal up, especially if you mention that we'd like a writing or evidence, that's when you need to slow it down and get that writing or evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Even just a quick discussion with a lawyer on a free consultation basis might help you understand more about why that's necessary, and then maybe start developing standardized contracts and procedures that protect their assets, their business, and make for smooth transactions.
Well, one of the deficits that I continue to see in the industry is a coming together to agree on terms. What gives something value? What does that really mean? So that our job isn't so tough. If somebody claims it didn't meet our standards, what do you do with that? What does that mean? Because they pull terms out of their ass. It's top shelf. Well, what does that mean? I mean, what are we talking about here?
I just did something with that just recently. I put a mechanism in a cultivation and a production contract where the requirement was something like top shelf. And I said, well, I'm a lawyer. My job is to make that way less spongy. And so what I came up with, and it might be something that you guys could employ, or maybe somebody listening could employ, is I said, when you decide that you want to buy a certain cultivator's flower, you probably got to sample that flower, right? So you can take that flower, you get it tested, you take pictures of it, right? And it's going to come back with some standards. This is how much THC, plus or minus. This is how much CBD, plus or minus. This is the makeup of the terpenes, plus or minus. This is the look, right? Because look is a very important part of cannabis sales. Mm-hmm. And incorporate that into the agreement. Say it needs to be close to this or reasonably close to this, and even incorporate the picture. There's no reason you can't have a picture in agreement, right? And it's kind of like the old scenario where you go to a fast food restaurant and they have this beautiful picture up on the screen and they give you this floppy thing that they're calling that picture on the screen. Well, anybody can see that it's not. So at least it takes this whole top shelf concept and boils it down to some objective criteria that you can apply. And what I think cannabis folks, either don't understand or don't want to understand. And I've been guilty of this too. And I'm not insulting the industry. I'm saying that everybody, yes, everybody goes to a deal with good intentions. Yes, you intend to buy it if it's top shelf. Yes, the cultivator intends to buy it top shelf. Yes, everybody agrees that they're very good at that already from some sort of historical norm. But that is not why we do contracts. We do contracts for when it doesn't happen, right? When the crop gets contaminated with mold and it's not marketable. Like, who is responsible for that? And it's okay to talk about those things. It actually builds a better contractual relationship if you can talk about potential issues up front with the people on the other side. And if you can't, maybe that's a sign. This is not the deal for you.
Well, I was litigating a case where it turned out that there were seeds in the finished product.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the issue was notice. When did the purchaser know that, there's seeds in it? And we have text back and forth, and the purchaser wanted to fight that, I don't want seeded weed. Well, then why'd you buy it knowing it? And we got into that whole pissing match that I didn't know. Well,
yeah, you have to inspect the
constructively your buyer knew, and he's,
right.
he can, so anyway, that started me on the path that we need to more define terms. Now, I've got a client I just picked up, and we're working on contracts right now. And I read through, and there's a bunch of terms in there. I look at that. What the hell is a LARF? It's like, what does this mean? So one of the first things I got to do is, here's the terms. Give me your definition. So if I write a contract, we know that this is not, today the LARF is this, or, whatever. There's got to be objective standards. So I'm trying to bake that in, but I keep encouraging, like, the distribution people and the retailers as a group, get together and try to figure out what is it that you attribute value to, and what would you reject a crop for, if it's less than what they say on our R&D test says this, and you do an R&D test and it's less. What does that mean? Exactly. Can we, without having to hire me or you for exorbitant money, just figure out, hey, this is our second level of value. This is what you're going to get. You don't like it, pound sand.
Right.
This is the agreement.
Absolutely. And so what you can do on that is you build a lot of these standardized agreements through analogy. For instance, it's production agreements for agriculturalists is not anything new. It's just cannabis, right? And it has regulatory requirements. So all you got to do is take kind of that the way that those things are transacted, because they look at some of the issues that are important and just modify them for cannabis. But you're absolutely right. What industry in this? I was thinking about this morning in the shower. Really, this is a true story. I'm sitting here thinking about I'm working on a deal for some clients, and there was some amount of money that exchanged hands, 6 figures, but there's no agreement in place, and we're just getting to the point where I'm starting to understand what the parties are thinking about, and they're way different. My clients on the other side they're just nowhere near it. And then they're like, hurry up and finish the deal. This should be done in 1 page, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, has anybody bought a car?
Yeah.
Any of these folks? Has any of these folks bought a house? Has any of these folks tried to get financing for a business? And I don't mean that to be snide or rude. What I'm saying is that when $100,000 changes hands, usually in those larger transactions that I was referring to, what does a stack of documents look like? Yeah. Is it 2 pages? Even though they're formed agreements that have been in place for years and years and years, do you actually get the work product back from those professionals in 24 hours like you always ask?
Yeah.
It's not going to work. It doesn't gel with reality. And so part of our job, of course, is to bring that reality to them, or else it's going to come to them in a completely different and more expensive way. But I just find it fascinating. I find it fascinating that folks honestly think in their head that amount of transfer of money doesn't require the type of formality that it would with any other product being bought or sold for that amount of money. It's crazy.
Well, and if you look at the analogies in the agricultural world, they've already, plowed this ground many times. Every agricultural product has standards to it, and deviation from standards make it A, B, whatever, whatever your numerical value is to it. So you buy, like wheat that you want to make into a certain kind of bread, you need this quality. And if they send you something else, it's like you reject it, or you're making something else and paying less for it.
And then they can go sell it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, we could keep thumping on this horse here, and I want to, have you back and chat more about stuff as they're relevant, because there's some real issues right now. And one of the things I'm telling my people who want me to do due diligence for investments is you better keep your finger on the pulse of the social movement right now, because it looks to me like they targeted some of these more corporate aligned businesses, if you will. Harborside got hit 3 times. Medman got smacked a few, even Starbucks got hit. So I'm trying to caution my people to be socially conscious and forego making as much money as you can to a long-term plan to be around and people want to buy your products. So, those are some more discussions I'd like, and you and I will chat as real-time events happen and compare some notes here. Any final closing comments you want to throw at us?
Well, I wanted to say that you looked very dapper today, and I wanted the audience to forgive my appearance. I'm actually in Lake Tahoe, and you hear the family going on in the background. But no, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, guys. I think this was a great conversation. I'm looking forward to future conversations. I think that hopefully somebody sees this and realizes it's time to pick up the phone call and call that insurance broker, call that attorney, call that accountant. Just talk with them for a half hour. It all costs your time. And you'll start to realize that there's a lot of things that you can do to protect yourself and to do better business. We got to keep getting better.
Well, Bob, we're going to put your identification information up when this goes out, and I'll encourage people to call you. And, when I need litigation, you're the guy I turn to.
Oh, so, thanks, Dale. Well, I mean, you just recently, right? We've had many run-ins, whether you're a mediator or there's a referral, and we all work together. There's enough work out there for all of us to do good work, fair price, and just have a good time. Hey, look, we're in the cannabis industry.
Yeah.
It's legal in California now. Like that old joke, the government's fighting the war on drugs against people on drugs, and they're losing. Yeah, and they've almost lost. It's coming. So it's a great time, isn't it?
It sure is. And, I ring you up because I trust you. And that's really the bottom line. You will have honest discussions with people, and you don't ever overestimate what you can do, and you come through with results. And, that's all you can really hope for when you bring an attorney in.
Thanks, Dale. I like to think that I keep colleagues that do the exact same like yourself. Thank you, sir.
Well, hug your wife and that baby. Okay.
All right. You guys have a great day. Thanks
you too,
again.
buddy. Talk to you later. Bye.